Criminal charges have now been filed against 32-year-old Jorge Luis Benitez Estremera of Thief River Falls in connection to that murder at Digi-Key Tuesday night. Estremera has been charged with 2 counts of varying degrees of second-degree murder and also assault in the 3rd degree. Now, we'll read through the criminal complaint. The names of witnesses and or police officers will not be used. Quote, on May 9th at approximately 10:12 p.m., Pennington County Dispatch received a medical call about a man on the ground not breathing. Deputies were the first law enforcement to arrive on scene outside of Digi-Key. Upon arrival, the deputy was waved down by a Digi-Key employee who showed the deputy where the man was lying on the east side of the building in a designated smoking area at Digi-Key. The deputy checked the man on the ground to see if he could assist, but realized he was deceased. That man has now been identified, not from the criminal complaint, as Steven Opdahl of Oklee, Minnesota. Back to the criminal complaint. A Thief River police officer also arrived on the scene, walked to the area, observed the body lying on the right side with a large amount of blood coming from the head area. The officer observed a sign laying to the north of the body, with the post of the sign laying across the legs of the body. The officer observed there was blood on the sign. The officer observed the body appeared to be a male with severe trauma to the left portion of his head. The deputy immediately started to move everyone away from the scene and attempt to preserve it, and then obtain information from an employee after Thief River Falls police officers took over the scene. One employee stated she came out to have her smoke break at approximately 10:08 p.m. and saw the body of the male, who was later identified as S.O., Steven Opdahl, who was also an employee at Digi-Key. Employee 1 stated that she did not see anyone else around and immediately called 911. The deputy was approached by another Digi-Key employee, employee number 2, who stated she was given an ID by another Digi-Key employee, employee 3, who had found it on the ground nearby. The ID belonged to Steven Opdahl and had blood on it. Opdahl. Deputy was shown where the ID was found. The ID was placed back in its found position. The ID was located farther north from where Opdahl's body was found. At approximately 10:57 p.m., a police investigator arrived on scene. Investigator observed severe injuries to Opdahl's head and a parking pole with a sign lying next to the body. The investigator learned there were articles of clothing in the garbage can that was outside near the northeast corner of the building that appeared to have blood on them. The investigator observed a blood trail going from the parking lot to the north of the victim's body down the sidewalk into the smoking area where the victim's body was laying. Thief River Falls another deputy chief arrived on scene and was directed to the smoking area on the east side of the building. At some point, that deputy was then directed to the area north of the body toward the public entrance to Digi-Key. Deputy observed there was blood on the ground on the sidewalk just to the east of the public entrance. The deputy also observed a paper cup lying on the ground, a Digi-Key ID lying next to the curb, and more blood on the ground next to the location where the ID was found. At approximately 10:45 p.m., Pennington County Chief Deputy requested assistance in the investigation. At 11:03 p.m., a deputy contacted the Minnesota BCA crime team, and law enforcement learned the entire incident should be on surveillance camera. Deputies met with the Digi-Key security manager and began reviewing Digi-Key surveillance video of Steven Opdahl being attacked by an unknown defendant, identified much later as the defendant Jorge Estremera. The defendant was observed to be wearing a white in-color T-shirt, lighter-colored pants, flip-flop footwear. Law enforcement observed the following from the surveillance video. At 10:19 p.m., a white four-door car being driven by the defendant, Estremera, entered the Digi-Key parking lot from the east and parks near the northeast corner of the building. The defendant observed as the sole occupant visible in the car. At that should be 9:19. At 9:44 p.m., Steven Opdahl exits the northeast public entry door, is observed lighting a cigarette and walking around the sidewalk area between the white four-door car and building. Opdahl observed holding a white cup in his left hand. At 9:45 p.m., Steven Opdahl is observed walking over and standing on the curb in front of the white four-door car and facing the white four-door car. 9:45, the defendant is observed exiting his vehicle and approaching Opdahl. 9:45:29, immediately upon reaching Steven Opdahl, the defendant knocks the cigarette out of Opdahl's right hand, grabs the cup from Steven Opdahl's left hand, and throws it on the ground. The defendant and Steven Opdahl appear to exchange words. At 9:45:39, the defendant punches Steven Opdahl on the left side of his head, causing him to fall, and he grabs the side of his neck and head. The defendant approaches Opdahl again, and the two appear to exchange words. 9:45:49, Steven Opdahl starts to walk back toward the public entry of Digi-Key. The defendant follows him. 9:45:52, the defendant grabs the back of Opdahl's shirt while he's walking away. The defendant pulls back and grabs him by the neck with both hands. The defendant then pushes Opdahl over the vehicle and slams Opdahl's head into the windshield of the white four-door car. Steven Opdahl appears to break the car's windshield. At 9:46, the defendant appears to throw two punches into Steven Opdahl's face, knocking him to the ground alongside the vehicle. Opdahl appears to hold up his hand in defense. The defendant kicks off his sandals and walks around Steven Opdahl. The defendant leans down, making hand gestures at Opdahl. At 9:46:08, the defendant throws another punch at Steven Opdahl's head. Opdahl appears to cover his head, trying to protect himself. The defendant then paces back and forth while Opdahl is on the ground. 9:46:26, Opdahl sits up, and the defendant throws about 6 punches, causing Opdahl to try and cover and protect himself. 9:46:34, the defendant paces around Opdahl, then runs at and kicks Opdahl in the rib area. The defendant then kicks Opdahl in the back of the head, sending him into the curb, striking his neck. The defendant then stomps on Opdahl's chest about 2 times. 9:46:40, the defendant grabs Opdahl's right foot and drags him backward approximately 4 feet and throws another punch to his head. The defendant then steps back, and Opdahl tries to get up. 9:46:45, the defendant again kicks Opdahl in the back, sending Opdahl face first into the sidewalk. Opdahl rolls over, tries to get up. The defendant kicks him in the back again. Opdahl again rolls around to get to his knees. The defendant then kicks Opdahl in the left shoulder area, causing him to fall in the back in the parking spot on the west side of the white four-door car. The defendant steps around Opdahl, kicks Opdahl again in the shoulder area. The defendant paces around Opdahl, then walks up to the sidewalk area. Opdahl remains sitting down while the defendant walks back and squats down to Steven Opdahl's eye level. The defendant and Opdahl appear to be talking. 9:47:22, the defendant walks behind Opdahl and grabs the top of Opdahl's head with his left hand and chin with his right hand, and he appears to be attempting to twist Opdahl's head. Opdahl grabs a hold of the defendant's arms and is able to break the defendant's grip. The defendant is throwing about 5 more punches at Opdahl's head and body. The defendant paces around by his car again. Opdahl is able to make it to his feet. Blood can be seen covering the left side of Opdahl's face. Opdahl walks back toward the entry door to Digi-Key with the defendant following him. Opdahl turns around and faces the defendant. The defendant and Opdahl appear to be talking. The defendant approaches Opdahl again. Opdahl tries to walk away. The defendant appears to throw another punch to Opdahl's body. Then Steven Opdahl tries to run, heading south down the sidewalk to the east side of the building. The defendant catches him, whips him around, and throws him on the ground. Opdahl rolls to the sidewalk and sits on the sidewalk. 2148, 94818. The defendant walks over to the building and grabs a sign on a post line next to the building. Steven Opdahl quickly gets up and starts to run down the sidewalk. The defendant chases Opdahl with the sign in his hand. The defendant strikes Opdahl in the head with the top of the sign. Opdahl falls into the designated smoking area. Opdahl did not put his hands out to catch himself from the fall and was then motionless. The defendant repeatedly strikes Steven Opdahl in the head and neck area with the top portion of the sign numerous times. The defendant throws the sign at Opdahl, leaving the sign laying across his legs. The defendant walks back to his vehicle. The defendant puts his sandals back on and returns to his vehicle. The defendant exits his vehicle and walks to the back of the vehicle, grabbing a jug of water from the trunk and then washing his hands. The defendant is observed throwing the water jug back into the trunk and returning to the driver's side of the vehicle. 9:56:07, the defendant gets out of the vehicle, removing his shirt and wiping his hands down his shirt. The defendant then stares over in the area of Steven Opdahl's body for approximately 7 seconds, then looks around and returns to his vehicle. Then 9:58:08, the defendant exits the vehicle wearing a dark-colored shirt with the number 23 on the back. The defendant wraps a towel around his waist, grabs what appears to be clothing he was wearing at the time of the assault, carrying his clothes over the garbage can, discarding them in the garbage can. The defendant returns to his vehicle. At 10:07:33, a female leaves Digi-Key to get into the passenger side of the defendant's vehicle. 22:08, the defendant's vehicle leaves, and law enforcement note unique characteristic of the vehicle that subsequently led them to the defendant. At 10:11:29, a female is observed walking north on the sidewalk to the east of the Digi-Key building and walking past the smoking area, seeing the body of Steven Opdahl. The female is observed continuing north and flagging down two people. At 10:15 p.m., a first deputy arrived on the scene. At no time during the incident did Steven Opdahl show any signs of aggression toward the defendant. Then, early Wednesday morning, May 10th at 12:17 a.m., a Pine to Prairie Drug Task Force officer reported that he believed he had found the defendant's vehicle in the parking lot of an apartment complex in Thief River. A number of officers went to the apartment associated with the parking spot. After several unanswered knocks, officers entered the apartment, finding the defendant and his girlfriend inside. Officers noticed the defendant matched the male suspect on the surveillance video of the assault. The defendant was subsequently arrested and taken to the law enforcement center. The female spoke to law enforcement and identified the defendant as her boyfriend, who picked her up from work at Digi-Key around 10 p.m. on the east side of Digi-Key next to Arctic Cat in a white car. She stated that she got in the car and saw the defendant had no pants on, and the defendant told her he had gotten into a fight. The defendant told her someone had been looking at him and he punched someone. She did not see any of the altercation. She asked the defendant about the damage to the windshield, and the defendant told her that he did not know. During a later formal interview, she said the defendant told her someone was standing right next to the car smoking, and that person was just staring at him, and he felt threatened, and he had said that he had punched him. The defendant claimed he felt a negative force from this person. She said the defendant had never been arrested for anything, never assaulted anyone, or been violent towards her or anyone. On May 10th, agents interviewed the defendants with the assistance of Language Line. The defendant admitted to assaulting a person at Digi-Key. The defendant claimed the person he assaulted was contaminated and needed to be taken out of the system, but he did not know the person and he was not afraid of the person. 32-year-old Jorge Luis Benitez Estremera facing 2 counts of second-degree murder and 1 count of assault in the 3rd degree. It's expected he'll make his first court appearance on Friday. I'm Neil Carlson reporting for iNewZ.TV.